Hi, this is Jeff Corsaro at Vespa Motorsport, scooterwest.com. I was going to go over replacing the belt and inspecting the transmission components on the LX150 IE. Most of these steps also apply to the GT200, the ET4, the older carbureted LXs, and I'll point out some of the differences as I go through this service here. First, I want to share some of the tools and parts you need to prepare to do the belt service. There's two special tools that you're going to need. The Variator holder that we sell, and this part number is Tool ETV. And you also need the clutch holder, which is Tool ETC. These two tools we've used in our shop for many years, and they've been holding up just well. We also have the original Piaggio tools available too. Some of the parts you'll need that are commonly replaced at 7,500 miles, which is around 10,000 kilometers. You want to replace the set of 6 roller weights, and they're the same on all 150cc Vespa and the Piaggio Fly. And these part number is CM1038015. The nut that secures the Variator, that's a 436783. This is a one-time use nut. This beveled washer right here collapses, so once it's collapsed it will no longer hold the torque correctly. We also recommend replacing the shoes that guide the ramp plate. That's a part of the Variator. Fairly inexpensive, and you'll need 3 of them. Part number 434855. And of course you'll need the belt. That's an 841213. This is the original Piaggio belt. We also have aftermarket belts available from Malossi, Gates, and Dayco. One other small part you might want to get is a zip tie. It can be found at any hardware shop, Walmart, anywhere. So some of the tools we'll need. We need a torque wrench that's capable of going up to 60 foot-pounds. Either 3/8 or 1/2 inch, depending on the sockets that you're going to use. I'll also be using my caliper to measure the existing rollers and belts, but we recommend replacing the belt regardless of what the service limit measurement is at 7,500 miles. And if you're riding the scooter at higher speeds or have a 190cc kit, we would recommend changing the belt at 5,000 or 6,000 miles, as we've seen them break prematurely if the motor's been modified. To get the belt cover off, you're going to need an 8mm socket, or we use a T-handle, it's a little quicker. Number 3 Phillips screwdriver to loosen up the air box. Number 2 screwdriver on the older LXs to take the side skirt off. And on the newer LXs, they've gone from a number 2 Phillips screw to a T25 Torex, so it's a star style. This is also included in your factory toolkit, a small L-shaped T25 Torex drive. Also need a pair of diagonals to cut the old zip tie off. An 18mm socket and also a 19mm socket. And I'm using 1/2 inch drive, and I also have a 1/2 inch drive wrench. You're going to need a shop rag, brake parts cleaner available at any auto parts store, and also the blue Loctite 43. I think it's 243. It's the low strength Loctite. 2 other tools that may be useful but aren't required. When you remove the 2 fasteners on the airbox, they're back in there, and you may not be able to grab them, so you can use a magnet to extract the screw once it's loosened. And also, if you get this small end cap off, on the newer scooters they use a T30 Torex drive, and that isn't included in your tool kit that comes with the scooter, so you'll get a Torex set that would have a T30 in there. Next, we need to remove some of the bodywork pieces on this LX150 IE to get access to the belt cover. Right here is the long screw, that's a T30. And up here is a T25 screw. It's got a larger head. And the lower screw right here is a number 2 Phillips screw, and make sure you replace those in the correct order. One threads into plastic, the other one threads into a clip that's in the bodywork. On the older LXs, there's no Torx used, it's just number 2 and number 3 Phillips will remove all 3 of these screws. And on the ET4, you'll lift the floorboard mat right here, and there's one number 3 Phillips screw that you need to remove the side skirt. So once that's loose, pull it back, and it hinges from the very tail end. There's two dowels that engage into the rubber plugs there. Set that aside. And then you can lift here and remove this little piece. Oftentimes you can leave it in place, but this makes it much easier to get access. Next, we'll take a number 3 Phillips to remove the 2 screws that fasten the airbox to the engine, and this hasn't changed. We're still using number 3 Phillips. Use your magnet to remove the screws, both the same length. Keep in mind there's a star washer and a flat washer. Oftentimes if these screws are loose, they'll rattle their way out, so you may need to replace these if they're missing. Now the airbox will lift out of the way. Next, cut the zip tie to the air intake snorkel. On the GT200, they have a little scoop that has an air cleaner, and you can remove the 2 screws to get access to the air cleaner. Remove the oil dipstick. Make sure you don't crank over the engine, as the oil will be pumped back through this. Remove the cover, and depending on the year, they've changed the design of how this cover attaches. And as you can see, there's pry spots near the 3 dowel pegs here. And this newer style snaps into 3 rubber plugs. Alright, next we'll remove the rear pulley. So go ahead and install your tool ETC into the 2 slots, and it will lock up the wheel. This tool is also useful when you're removing the rear axle nut to remove the rear tire. Comes in handy for 2 uses. 19mm socket. Break it free. Out comes the nut. And there's also a washer in there that makes sure to keep track when you pull the belt cover off that the washer is not lost. Next, you need to remove all the fasteners of the belt cover, all M8. I usually go around and crack them all. And the one in the front oftentimes has a ground strap wire on the fuel injected models, and also on the ET4s. On the carbureted LXs, the ground wire is hooked to the starter motor. Make sure this is reconnected. Oftentimes the screw that holds this single clip to this center fastener is a little bit longer than all the other belt covers. Keep this in mind, as this screw will not fit in many of the other spots. And down here is the vent hose for the final drive gear oil. Now that you have all the screws removed, the belt cover, a little bit of wiggling, should come free. If you have any difficulty, there's a pry spot right here, and also on the back that you could use a small slide hammer to the pull-at to free up the belt cover. Only use that as a last resort, as these belt covers are fragile and could potentially break the belt cover. You have to lift the air box out of the way. To free up the belt cover. Take note that there's two dowels here. You want to check this bearing. If it turns rough or feels dry feeling, you may want to replace that bearing. And on the older models, there's going to be a kickstart mechanism that's all underneath this plate, and you could check operation by pressing the kickstarter and verifying that the gear protrudes and engages with the centerpiece pawls of the pulley. Alright, the next tool we'll be using is a tool ETV to hold this ring gear driven pulley, the drive pulley half here, and the peg goes into a spot where the dowel of the belt cover goes, and the three teeth engage with the gear here. Use one of your belt cover screws. Go ahead and tighten. This is the 18 millimeter, so it's slightly smaller. The 19 will work, but it's the wrong size for that nut. This nut, make sure you discard it and not reuse it there. As you can see, the flat washer, the bevel washer has been flattened and it's no longer reusable. The spacer is removed. On the older models, this has teeth that engage with the kickstarter, and there's also on some models there's a very thin washer that's made out of shim stock that's also removed that goes in between this and that, but on these newer ones does not exist. You can leave the tool in place, pull the pulley off. If you have high miles or you're using the scooter at high speed frequently, you may see a groove. This is a brand new Variator, so it's perfectly smooth. If your top speed is suffering, you may have a groove worn here, and it may be a time to replace both this outer pulley and also the Variator if the metal has been worn away from friction from the belt. Next, we'll remove the clutch bell. On the very old ET4s, there's an extra spacer. Keep track of it. Do not install the spacer if you have the newer style clutch bell that has the welded on spacer. Next, we'll pull the clutch away, pull the belt out, check the operation of the clutch. And I'm twisting it and it turns smoothly. If you have a broken belt, we highly recommend that you rebuild this assembly, as there may be parts worn leading to the broken belt, and oftentimes the broken belt will damage and compromise the grease seals that are in this Variator assembly here. And also with the clutch, shoes last quite a long time. When they're down to the last millimeter, it's time to replace the complete clutch assembly. And frequently, if there's a lot of noise coming from your Variator idle, you may want to check this plate. If this plate is loose, you may need to replace the clutch assembly too. We're not going to go over rebuilding this, but we highly recommend rebuilding this assembly every 15,000 miles. But each time we do have it off, we'll pack a small amount of grease into the needle bearings in here. Alright, and the last part that comes out is the Variator itself. This boss pulls out. Keep in mind the rollers oftentimes will just fall out as you pull this. This ramp plate assembly will pull away, expose the variator weights. And the last part to inspect is the starter Bendex. If you're having any problems with electric start system, pull this out and check the operation. You want to make sure that returns, and also put a very small amount of grease on both the shafts. And we'll put that back in place as we don't need to. Alright, we're going to go ahead and inspect the Variator rollers. I'm not going to replace them on this one as this is a fairly low miles bike, but oftentimes you'll look for the flat spots and measure. A new roller is around 19 millimeters. If there's any spot that measures under 18.5, it'd be time to replace the rollers. And oftentimes we've seen these rollers outlast the belt, but Piaggio recommends replace them at 7,500 miles regardless of wear. And when you reinstall the rollers, this plastic face faces counterclockwise, and the open face, sometimes they're painted, sometimes they're unpainted, faces clockwise. You want to make sure that you reinstall them in the correct orientation, as you can see. This boss oftentimes gets residue on it that causes the Variator to hang up at lower speeds, causing rough riding. So you can clean it with brake parts cleaner, any of the residue that builds up on it. And make sure it slides freely in there. Very little free play in there. We've rarely seen the bushings wear out prematurely on the Piaggio products. Also inspect the rollers. There should be about 0.5 millimeter play. If there's any more, you may need to replace the complete Variator assembly. The shoes, they slide out. We recommend replacing these because this leads to excess noise from the transmission if they're worn. And go ahead and drop the ramp plate into the Variator, and we can reinstall this. This is a new Variator, so we're not going to work on this too much. If this surface is excessively glossy, you may want to scuff it up with some 220 sandpaper to break down the gloss surface so the new belt will seat to it. And same goes with the Variator half here. This is lined up with splines. And with the clutch, oftentimes if you have rough acceleration off the line, you may want to clean your clutch shoes. You can sand those with 220 grit, blow the assembly out with compressed air, and same goes with the bell. And to engage the belt into the cover, the belt has an orientation arrows. You may want to have them oriented upright so you can see the arrows, the direction. This turns is counterclockwise here. So I'm twisting the Variator assembly to get the belt into the V of the pulleys here. Once you do that, you can grab it and hold it in place. Replace the clutch bell. As you can see, the belt is further up the pulley. In between the outer Variator half, there's a washer. You need to replace this washer. Replace the pulley. Replace the spacer, and we'll apply a small amount of the blue Loctite to the threads. And use the brand new nut. Use the 18 socket with the torque wrench. Oftentimes this is torqued anywhere from about 57 to 62 foot-pounds. Now you can remove the Variator holding tool. Next we'll replace the belt cover and button up the bodywork back to where it was to begin with. Make sure the starter gear is in place. Belt cover, again, it's a little bit difficult. You need to push the air box out of the way. And we'll go ahead and replace some of the screws. The longer screw that holds the brake cable clamp. And oftentimes I'll put them in an alternating order. Make sure that the Variator cover is seated and nothing's pinched. So if you torque it down, there's a chance of breaking the Variator cover. Ground strap. And if you like to use a torque wrench, these are torqued to 7.5 to 8 foot-pounds. The T-handle gives you a good feel for it. It's just a little bit of a tug and that's it. All right. After you have the belt replaced with 11 fasteners torqued, go ahead and reinstall the rubber snorkel. And secure with a zip tie. And clip the excess zip tie here. Replace the oil dipstick. Replace the small washer that goes in between. Replace the nut. And as you notice, I have the center stand up, and oftentimes you can spin the tire, get it started, and replace the Variator hold tool. Torque this one to 45 foot-pounds, the 19mm socket. There's 45. All right. Replace the cover. Just snaps into place. Drop the air box back down. Make sure the mud flap's also in place because the air box screws go through the mud flap. If you have any difficulty getting the screws through, you may want to check the mud flap. And I would recommend getting both of these started before you torque them down. Alright, replace the cover. Place the side skirt. This little tab engages into the tailpiece. Pop it into the, use your number T30 Torx drive. Your lower screw is a number 2 Phillips. Take care not to over tighten this as this goes into the plastic bodywork of the floorboard. And the upper screw is a T25 Torx. You've now completed the job here. Pretty quick and simple as long as you have all the correct tools. Some other key measurements is the belt. If you're going to reuse a belt, you measure it in a couple spots. A new belt measures around 22 millimeters. And the Piaggio recommended service limit is 21 millimeters. So if there's any spot that measures under 21 millimeters, you need to replace the belt. And as I covered with the roller weights, new they're around 19 millimeters, and the service limit is 18.5 millimeters.